Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my channel. I am truly so glad you're here. If you are new here, please check out my content. I have so much work and love put into these concepts around attachment and trauma and childhood and healing from borderline and or narcissistic or some type of emotionally immature parent. If that is you or you're not really sure, this is a great place for you to learn more, I hope, and to join this growing little community. So thank you to all of you who show up. I really do truly appreciate you. I am sorry I did not post a video yesterday. I really am trying to post Monday through Friday, but we got a new kitten over the weekend and it just really derailed a lot of things. And so I will be sharing, more of her hopefully soon. I am going to take next week off. I'm going to take a break from making content. And so I'm just probably going to run, I don't know, maybe other videos I've done before or leave it as it is, but don't worry, I have not disappeared. I'm just going to take some much needed time for myself. Many of you know I've talked about growing up as a child of borderline and narcissistic parents, and that has often played out in my overachievement and really pushing myself to exhaustion, and it's not good for me. And so I'm really working on this in my own therapy and here with you guys and also in my own life. So that's what's going to be happening. Okay, so I really wanted to dive into this topic around narcissistic parents and how these types of relationships really truly impact not just our childhood as we are kids, but how we live our adult lives. And so I want to talk about this next week or two, just these topics. And so I don't think it's necessarily helpful to put a label, but I do think that saying, oh, this wasn't about me. My parents struggled with some form of borderline or narcissism, or just, I don't know what it was, but it was not good emotional regulation. It wasn't modeled well in terms of managing the self, things like that. So I'm hopeful that this channel will also help you understand if that's you, and then not just give you information, but also potentially a little growing community or connection. So in my course, for example, on healing and dealing with borderline and or narcissistic parents, which what I often call the trauma. For example, like this is an assessment page of fathers. Here's the assessment page for mothers of narcissistic families. And it may just be that your parent was heavy on the traits, but those things can really impact you. And so I want to start out with the first video, which is, don't you know who I am? I have witnessed firsthand, both clinically and personally, the impact of a narcissistic type parent who just doesn't have the ability to see you and how that plays out in your life. And so let's talk about what that looks like. Now, the heart of a narcissistic parent, and this is really true for a covert narcissist versus a more classic narcissist or some variation, is there tends to be this sense of being engulfed by them or ignored by them. So it's like you're completely consumed when you reflect them, or they couldn't give, two about you and your life, and that's what it feels like. And this starts very early in childhood, from them being on their cell phones. Yes, we've now reached a generation where kids have grown up with parents on their phones or their computers, to parents only having interests in things that matter to them. That is the heart of it. So that's going to play out differently depending upon the engulfment, where let's say it's something that they really care about versus the ignoring things they don't care about. And so really what this is that you only matter, and my effort as a parent will only show up or not based on how much I value what you're doing, not how much I value you. Because if a person is truly narcissistic, though they can tell you they love their kids all day long, and in their own way, I do believe that they do. It's just that their own insight and role, it's like they are never at fault. They might even placate you occasionally and say, well, I could work on that, but they don't work on it. They don't change it. And that's how you know, is that you ask again and again and again, and you only matter, as I'm saying, when it reflects them. And so that repeating itself over and over again has a tendency to feel like they don't even know who you are. And I would argue they really don't. So it will play out in things like forcing you to do sports or hobbies or interests as a kid that they made you do, 7 years of baseball that you didn't really care for, and then you only being judged because you were just good enough, or maybe you were great at it, but you only did it because that's when you stood in that parent's light. And so they get overly involved because it's their sport. On the other side of it is if it's not their sport or their hobby or their passion, they won't take you to practice, they won't show up to games, they won't take you to lessons, all of that stuff. They won't give you the right equipment or help you be ready or prepared. And so that really becomes clear that you learn very early, even when you're very little, right? If you learn in kindergarten that daddy only comes to ballet when he has to and takes me there, and he always forgets my shoes or fights with mom about it or the other dad about it, whatever's happening, that becomes clear. And so they only reinforce what they care about. So the bottom line is only if it's good enough for them do they show their support. The second thing is they will only often talk about topics of interest to them. You'd be surprised how many adult parents will discuss everything about their job to like a 7-year-old, right? Who could give, once again, has no interest, I'll say. And so they will basically talk about their dreams. They'll discuss topics of interest. They're often very smart and successful narcissistic parents, but they'll be discussing a legal case, with a 9-year-old, like I'm saying, or you're in high school and you just, don't really want to talk to them about anything at this point because you've learned that they don't have any real interest to share unless it's a topic they care about. And God help you if it's a political difference, that's another big issue. But basically, they will only give you, engagement around topics they care about, and or they'll ask how you're doing and then be like, great. And then that's it, right? No further questions, no engagement, very minimal. And only if, like I said, if the topic happens to be a good enough topic or a topic they care about. The next one is you only feel loved from them when you're doing this, right? When you're playing the sport, when you're doing well in the hobby or the interest, when you're doing well in school, because they will just absolutely reinforce the things that they and often society deem as valuable and worthy and successful. And so you start to realize that, well, maybe I don't love baseball, but I only feel loved when I'm doing baseball. And that starts to really do a number on your head in terms of, well, what are your passions and hobbies? What does matter? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. And so basically, we often have these very surface level relationships with them. They're very conditional relationships with them. And then when you don't respond, like let's say you start to go, well, I hate baseball, I'm not putting my shoes on. They will then project all of their negative feelings about you and how you're a quitter, you're selfish, you're spoiled, you don't appreciate how much they've sacrificed to take you to this sport. And you're like, yeah, but I never really wanted to in the first place. And so you're not allowed to go outside the parameters. And so the outcomes here are identity issues. Like I'm saying, you don't often know who you are, what matters to you, what you love to do. And it also can really impact your ability to be vulnerable because you've learned that you don't open up and share, and you certainly don't open up and share around things that don't fit that little parameter of what they care about. And so what can you do, right? It's really important because so many times these children feel, and frankly you are unknown to these parents. You can't be known in a deep sense. And a lot of people struggle with, well, are parents supposed to know me? Yeah, they are. Now, not perfectly, not always, and it can go through shifts and changes in the cycles as you mature, but we're at least supposed to attempt to try to know you. And yes, your kids, I will say this as a parent of 4, they're different people. And it's natural that when your child likes something that you understand more or like more, that you might naturally find yourself more drawn to that. Not to that child, but to that topic, but maybe to that child. But that doesn't mean, that you're a bad person. It just means you're human, but it's what you do with it. And so sure, our kids are different little people. Just like if you walk into a room full of other humans, you might not resonate with them, but these are your children. And so you're gonna wanna work at pushing yourself to watch video games if that's what they love, which I know from firsthand experience, I didn't always succeed at. That was a tough one for me sometimes. I would try to play with them and I would enjoy that more. But when you've got, a bunch of kids doing different things, it's also hard to spread yourself out. And that's a whole other argument for having a bunch of kids, which I could do a whole series of videos on as an only child. But my point is that you try and you work to know your kids. You let them see that even if you don't understand maybe they have some rock collecting hobby. It's not the hobby that matters. It's them. That you recognize their passion, their interest, their heart, what they care about. That you don't have to be perfect in your interest, but you have to really try to show them as much as you can that they matter, right? That the heart of who they are, that you love that about them. And for narcissistic parents, that is going to be a hard and a tall order to fill. And so what can you do? You can work on pursuing identity issues. I'm not talking about how you identify, although that could be impacted. I believe everything is impacted by our parents' acceptance or love or whatever. But I'm talking about like your passions, your hobbies, your interests. That's one of the exercises I have in this course I created on healing and dealing with narcissistic or BPD parents, because it is a real trauma, and oftentimes we don't know who we are. So it's in my course, but you can also do things like, go to a word list of adjectives, of descriptives, of personality types or interests, and circle the things that matter to you. There are lots of exercises you can just type in and seek out on, who am I? What do I care about? So things like that. Take a risk, lean in, start a new hobby, show up to a new group, push yourself to try one new thing that in childhood you would have naturally, been drawn to, but because your parent or parents disregarded that, you've disregarded it in yourself. And so take a risk there. Bring yourself more into conversations, allow yourself to not just listen and placate others, like, oh, tell me about that, or opposite, just to shut down because you feel like nothing I say matters anyway. You want to challenge yourself to bring yourself in and your vulnerability and authenticity. And this is a process, I know, but it's so important that you lean into cultivating a sense of who you are, and that you examine your fears of also and behaviors around being engulfed or ignoring either yourself or others, your children, your spouse. Do you carry these fears? And so it kind of holds you back and you've walled yourself up from leaning in. And then I love this idea of creating some kind of force field, imaginary energy around yourself. I don't care if it's magical or mystical or just some basic, science principle. But the idea is that when you're with these narcissistic parents or engaging with people like this that trigger those parents, you imagine this like field of protection that bounces off of you when they try to project all of their yuckiness. You imagine it not belonging to you and it bouncing back to them. And I know this sounds kind of like whatever, but I promise you these little moments sometimes, or imagine them handing you a bag and you hand it back and you're like, this does not belong to me, as I keep saying. So the heart of it is that it's very common for you to feel like, don't you know who I am? And the truth is, if they're a true narcissistic parent, no, they don't know who you are. It does not mean for 1 second, though, that it has anything to do with you or your value or your worth. It was never about you. That's the problem, I know. And you deserved it to be about you. But you can't keep showing up at that narcissistic parent's door if they're not shifting and changing, which they most of the time don't, and expect them to wake up one day and see you. You have to see you. And you have to find people to bring into your life that see you. And people that can't see you again and again and again, why are they still there, right? Why are they still there? You deserve to be seen. So, I know that you know who you are. It's in there. It might be buried deep, or there might be little pockets where you know who you are, but others you've just completely ignored and neglected. It's time to make a step towards healing that wound. So, look in the mirror. Start asking yourself who you are if you don't know, because that is where it begins. And then stop asking the world and people who will never be able to define your beauty who you are. So, please take good care and stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow.